Hey, it's Wednesday. The elections were last night, but I have no idea what happened because I was talking with Joe Rogan for 3 hours. It was amazing and a lot of fun and a great conversation. I hope you'll listen to that podcast. Download that now. Coming up right here on episode 3 of Stand Up with Pete, one of my favorite journalists writing about the most important issue in the world, climate change. If you're pissed off about climate change, subscribe to heated.world. Journalist, writer, and all-around amazing person, Emily Atkin, and I sat down, learned a lot from her, and I learn so much every day from her newsletter, heated.world. Here's my conversation with Emily Atkin right now in episode 3 of Stand Up. Make sure you subscribe and make sure you give it a 5-star rating. Appreciate you tuning in.
People think that I came into this and did this because I'm passionate about climate change, and it's just not true. Like, I started doing this because I'm passionate about journalism, and that's always been my goal. My goal was never to be a climate change reporter. I wanted to cover politics, or I wanted to cover healthcare. When I was in school, I didn't go to school for environmentalism. It was journalism. And when I look at climate change as a issue, I look at it as a journalistic issue. I think that it's not been communicated honestly by journalists for a long time. I think that's our main problem. I think that journalists haven't approached climate change with the same level of vigor and ruthlessness that they've covered other political topics. I think it's because, for some reason, the fossil fuel industry has convinced them that there's no corruption to be seen here. There's a reluctance among journalists today to take climate change seriously as a corruption story, which is the heart of what our profession does. And I think that that's harming democracy because people don't see climate change the way that they should, in the most truthful way. Journalists aren't, as a whole, aren't living up to their responsibility. That's what I'm passionate about.
Well, when you say journalists weren't covering it correctly, we're talking about newspaper, magazine, local, national reporting. We're talking about television, all of it, or do you break down journalism? Because I feel like every time we talk about the news and media and journalism, this is what I feel, that people are so often, they're only talking really about cable news, like CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, or television news, and they're not talking as much about print journalism. Have journalists as a whole or gotten that wrong on climate change, or would you segment it?
There's an argument for segmenting it now, of course, but I wouldn't segment it for the majority of the last 30 years. When I first started in climate change reporting, I got hired at ThinkProgress to be a climate change reporter in 2013. And that same year, NPR had just laid off its entire green desk, and so had the New York Times. They just got rid of all their environmental reporters.
Because it wasn't making money?
Yeah,
People
because
weren't reading it?
And that same year, CNN President Jeff Zucker said, "We haven't figured out how to tell the climate change story yet. People just don't care about it." It's something along those lines. I'm not getting the exact quote right, but
how dare you misquote Zucker?
How dare I? But that quote, which I wish I had in front of me, but that quote is, I think, representative of how everyone saw it at the time, which was that they needed to prioritize what was making money, what was selling, and the environment coverage just wasn't doing that. And so while that was happening in that's our mainstream public radio, our biggest, most respected newspaper. I will give both of those institutions major props for upping their coverage over the last 6 years, especially within the last 2 years. But is that enough to create an informed citizenry that is able to respond to complex problems? Because that's the purpose of journalism. That the purpose of journalism is to create an informed citizenry that is able to make the right decisions about the biggest problems facing it. I don't think that we have that information right now.
The main reason I assume, Emily, that you feel the way you do about journalism and think what you think about journalism is because your mentor when you first started out was Wayne Barrett. Who is he, and what did he teach you, and what did you do with and for him?
Yeah, I was incredibly lucky to be one of Wayne's many research assistants. Wayne was an investigative reporter for the Village Voice for over 30 years, and his passion was uncovering corruption by the rich and powerful that was affecting the vulnerable and needy, and especially the New York City's non-white majority population. He saw power brokers, bosses, campaign givers and takers all over New York City taking advantage of the city's vulnerable populations, and that made him pissed the hell off. And he considered it his journalistic mission to uncover that corruption, because he was the voice of the people. And so Wayne did that, and his main targets actually coming up in New York City were Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, Al Sharpton, Ed Koch. I mean,
powerful, influential people in different circles.
Chuck Schumer, Mario Cuomo. I mean, Democrats and Republicans. He always said that because he was progressive minded. Obviously, he always said that we're better at goring our own. Because if you say that you're a progressive, then you better damn well be living those values when you're in a position of power. And if you're not, then you deserve to be exposed. But anyway, I mean, Wayne taught me to be fearless in the face of injustice and to be angry about it. But he also taught me that good journalism is motivated by not only anger at injustice, but empathy and compassion for the people who are being subjected to injustice, and not really being so motivated by your anger in the writing, really just using the facts to expose and to let people know. He was passionate and had faith in people that given the information that they would make the correct choices.
What else did he teach you?
Well, Wayne taught me never to take for granted the institution of journalism, and its power to make change, and to never, and to really take my responsibility as a journalist seriously, because there are so many times when you only have one window or one opportunity to tell a story and people are going to pay attention. I mean, an illustration of this is when I was his research assistant. At this point, he had been fired from the Village Voice because he cost them too much money. He'd been working there for 30 years, and they wanted, the new owners of the paper, they wanted to move to a digital strategy, right? And so Wayne's this old school investigative reporter guy, and they're like, you don't really get like the clicks that we're looking for. So they fired him. There was a mass walkout of the paper.
As a result of his firing?
Yeah. Mass walkout.
What did that look like?
I mean, so...
Was it like everybody, like Rudy? They just laid their jerseys down for him?
Yeah, exactly. It was like that. No, it totally was.
I can bring almost everything back to that stupid movie.
That's interesting. Huh.
Well, that's a judgment I want you to unpack. Do you want to wrap it up now based on my taste in film?
No. It's like...
I was a small athlete. Anyway, so people, they walked out?
Yeah, because Wayne...
They left their jobs?
That's how powerful Wayne was.
That's not very common.
I'm not the only Wayne turn, is what people call. We call ourselves Wayne interns.
I feel like Matt Taibbi was.
Matt Taibbi was also one. Yeah. Huh. And he has an army. There's an army of us out there
that just had so much respect for his work and his integrity that you couldn't beat it. So if you beat him, then you didn't want to beat him.
Yeah, and his anger. We had respect for his anger.
His anger was about just injustice in general? Yeah,
well, and what I was going to tell you is that, so when I said to not take for granted my responsibility and my position, was that, once when I was doing research for him, he at this point we were doing a story for the Daily Beast about a congressional race in New York. And it was my job to go to campaign headquarters of this politician, find somebody there and ask them 3 questions. And it was a tough job because it was this little middle of nowhere office in Queens somewhere. And I had to finagle my way in there and get to the person that I needed. And I was 21 years old, so I didn't really know what I was doing. And somehow I got in there and I got to the person and I asked him 2 of the questions and I forgot the 3rd one. And because I hadn't written it down, but I thought since I had actually done it, because it was such a long shot that I could have even done it, that it would be fine. So I called Wayne and I told him, okay, I got it. I did it. Here's what he said to this. Here's what he said to that. And he said, what do you say to the 3rd thing? I said, I forgot to ask it. And it was like I had murdered someone he loved. He was just like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like you had 1 shot to ask these questions.
Wow.
You couldn't write these things down on a piece of fucking paper and be prepared. You have 1 shot to do this, and you were not going to get another one. Why are you even doing journalism?
Wow, and you're 21 at that time? That's pretty brutal.
Oh, so brutal. But it was not personal. It was because Wayne wanted to tell this story. And
did you know that then? Did you not take it personally? Did you not? I mean, what kind of a person, what kind of strength and confidence did you have at that point? Most people don't.
I think the thing with Wayne was that I knew that Wayne cared about me. Wayne could be that. He could be that passionate and angry about you fucking up the story, but the next moment he would never apologize for being angry about that. But you knew that Wayne cared about you as a human being. And he'd always ask me about my personal life and about my goals and do whatever he could to help me meet those goals. And then later, he would explain why he got so angry. And I respected it because
without an apology, but
no,
right.
He didn't need to apologize. I mean, honestly, I understood because we were trying to expose corruption.
Right.
Right. And that corruption affects so many people. Corruption is the reason why we have a climate crisis, right? It's the reason why millions of people might die, why ecosystems might collapse.
Are collapsing.
And even more. I mean, that is solely because people decided that it was more important for them to make a short-term profit than to do something that they know they should have done. So they lied and they spread a misinformation campaign about climate science for 30 years and did everything they could to maintain their profits. So now we only have 12 years to solve this problem instead of 42 because people were corrupt. So yeah, if I have an opportunity to expose that corruption and someone who's working for me, 66%'s it, I'm going to be pissed the fuck off. I'm going to be like, you had 1 shot to expose this corruption and you didn't. It's not because I don't care about you. It's because this is fucking important. So, Wayne spent his life, part of his life, trying to expose Donald Trump and hated him so much. And Trump hated Wayne too. And Wayne died the day before Trump's inauguration, which I always find is like some weird, he was just like, nah, I can't do this. This is too much for me to see in my life.
And I did my part.
Yeah.
This one's not on me. I told you who this guy was.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, I got the book. You read the book. I gave you the papers. Just go look at them. I'm out.
What was do you recall, do you know anything that he had written about Trump? Anything that's still obviously, people might not know, and it's relevant now in terms of how he is as president?
I think the main thing that Wayne uncovered, I probably couldn't point to one specific that really wrapped it up, but Wayne's reporting was always on Trump's dealings as a real estate developer in New York City. And the basic theme of what he uncovered was that Trump was always failing up And he was always making these terrible deals that screwed over vulnerable people and acting like they were these big, glitzy, glamorous deals. And
he knew they weren't.
And he knew they weren't. And he was using these sort of mob-like tactics in the real estate industry. And then they were basically the tactics that Wayne laid out in his reporting were almost mirrored exactly in the presidential campaign. And so whereas Wayne for his whole career was very New York focused, he's not a national reporter by any means, during the 2016 presidential campaign, he became this national figure that reporters all over were interviewing and being like, so what is it about this guy? He had a trove of documents in his basement about Trump and his real estate dealings, and he just let reporters come over and comb through them.
Wayne Barrett had a basement. Where did he live?
First of all, he lived in that basement.
But he had a house?
In Brooklyn.
Okay.
He and his wife, Fran, lived there, and Wayne worked in his basement all the time. And it's, Wayne died of a lung disease. Wayne never smoked a cigarette or pot in his life.
Really? So he's probably breathing mold or something.
I'm not exactly 100% sure, but it's definitely something that, other Wayne turns and I have talked about, just always
because
in that
of working
basement.
in that basement. Oh my God.
All the time. I mean, you don't know, but because it was it was interstitial lung disease now that I remember. And it was one of those things like, how could that have happened to you?
Well, it could be genetic too, so probably.
I do remember that Trump did once offer to move Wayne out of Brownsville. He was living in Brownsville, Brooklyn.
It's a rough neighborhood.
Yeah. If he would stop covering him.
And he probably wouldn't have done that, though.
No.
Right.
Wayne?
No, Trump wouldn't have followed through.
Oh, I mean, Who knows?
So let me try to, kind of connect journalism and specifically, Wayne Barrett's ethics and what you learn from him in terms of covering vulnerable populations to climate change. I think that might be a really interesting thing to talk about, because we never talk in media about poor people living in poverty, lower income people, whatever phrase you want to use. They're voiceless. There's no special interest group. People think that it's a choice. They're, if only they work harder and so on. But really it has to do with opportunity, and we can talk about our economic system and so many other, education, obviously healthcare. But when it comes to climate change, the understanding that I have, and maybe there's, I'm sure, a lot of nuances, but it seems pretty straightforward, is vulnerable communities, developing nations are in much more danger to climate change than affluent communities and affluent nations. And the reason why that sucks and it's such an injustice is because the people who are consuming the most, big homes, many cars, many homes, lots of stuff, buying lots of stuff, rich nations, wealthy people, we're the ones to blame. I've heard the statistic, it's 5% of the world's population is in America, but we use 25% of our natural resources, and that's just America. We can talk about. But so how much of climate change is it developed nations to blame, and how much of the consequences do poor people and underdeveloped nations face?
The United States is the largest historical emitter of carbon dioxide. So right now, the United States isn't emitting the most carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's China.
India.
China is doing that. China and India.
Brazil, China, India, Russia, U.S.
Yeah.
Populations.
Right, exactly. But over the course of history, human history, the United States has emitted far more than China has. And it is because of our carbon emissions that we have prospered as a society, right? We had our industrial revolution fueled an economy boom, and we became, the richest nation on earth because of it. And now, as other countries are trying to develop to replicate our model, they're also trying to use fossil fuels or trying not to use fossil fuels. It doesn't really matter, but they're coming up against the fact that that model is now unsustainable, because if they keep doing it, then the climate crisis is going to worsen and all of the progress is going to be for naught. One of the benefits that we also have as the main, the United States is the main contributor to climate change, is that we also have the more resources to help prepare us to adapt to some of climate change's effects that are already here and that are going to come, whereas developing nations do not have those resources, and they're not getting it from us anymore because we're America First now. We don't contribute to the Green Climate Fund anymore, which helps developing nations prepare for.
When did that start?
And as soon as Trump came into office,
It's amazing how much how much power the president has to make or break treaties or deals like that. President has, whoever it is, has way too much power to stop supporting countries and resources and initiatives like that.
Well, and it's interesting too, because it's not just that the Trump administration, the presidency has that power. They're also exercising their power to try and prevent individual states from entering into negotiations with other countries too. The Trump administration just recently a couple days ago, sued the state of California for trying to enter into a carbon pricing agreement with Canada. So they're like, you can't do that. That's our thing. You can't try and fix climate change with Canada, because we have said that nobody can fix climate change with another country. So it's interesting.
How much power does California have on this issue? Because they've set standards for emissions for cars. They have 40 million people. It's bigger. That state is bigger than most countries. It's the most populated state in the U.S. And so they're like their own country in a way. But it seems like, even though conservative-minded, federalism-supporting type conservatives, say it's states' rights and argue about that all the time, but when they're in power, it seems like the big government is in charge. How much influence does a California have on these issues?
I mean, I think it's completely illustrative that how much power they have, because if they weren't so powerful, if their policies didn't have the potential to upend entire industries nationally, right, then the Trump administration wouldn't be trying to stop California from doing it.
And
exactly.
Agriculture industry.
Right. The Trump administration is stepping in because these industries are going to Trump and saying, this is screwing with us, with our ability to operate efficiently. California's policy, we lobbied for you to get rid of all these federal regulations for climate change, but now California is doing its own thing, and it's hurting our bottom line. Right. We don't want to comply, so can you step in? And the Trump administration is stepping in, which is illustrative of how powerful that is. But I do want to go back also to a certain point when you were talking about vulnerable people in developing countries versus developed countries.
Sure.
We still have California too is a great example of this. It's not like we don't have vulnerable people here who aren't completely fucked when a climate change weather event happens versus, the better off people in our society. The California wildfires happening right now. If you remember, LeBron James
I heard
said
LeBron
something,
James had to leave his house.
He's like, oh man, I don't know where to go. Like,
is LeBron James in a shelter right now?
I think I think he's probably fine, but
probably
like,
has a
who
pop-up
knows?
shelter. But think
about how hard it would be.
Hurricane Katrina. I mean, yeah, I was just watching some old footage of that. And I don't know, people really need to look this up. It's sad but funny when Wolf Blitzer says these people are so poor and so black. I never heard he said that. It's one of the craziest. Clearly he didn't mean that, but I mean, every black person I know, I think, loves that because it's just so weird and funny. And
this Wolf Blitzer being like, they're so black.
I gotta find it and play it. But anyway, you're talking about vulnerable populations in the U.S. Poor people in the U.S. being affected by climate change is a legit thing because of wildfires, hurricanes, flooding, and when your home wherever you live is destroyed, you don't have anywhere to go. Like a huge part of the population of New Orleans had to relocate to Houston. Speaking of weird things people said then about black people, Barbara Bush said something about black people coming from New Orleans to Houston. The bottom line is what you're saying is that in the U.S., vulnerable communities also suffer from these climate change, natural disasters.
Right. And when I think about Wayne being outraged on behalf of vulnerable people, I'm not just, of course, I'm thinking about people all over the world in developing countries. I'm also thinking about people in my city, in my community, in California, in my country, all over this country. I'm thinking about people who aren't as lucky as LeBron James, who can be like, does anyone have a place for me to stay? Who maybe don't even have a car to get away from the wildfires.
Right.
Who, the idea of losing all their possessions, it is far more existential than anything you and I could ever think about.
Absolutely.
And I think about Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and the fact that there was so much flooding and people's homes they lived in their whole life, the only stability they had, were just gutted. And then because of the inadequacy of federal and state disaster response, lived for years in just moldy homes, which, I think about Wayne again, and I'm just like, and I get pissed. Because I'm just like, this is such an injustice. It's an injustice and it's not an injustice that, I caused by eating too many hamburgers or that I caused by taking one too many flights. It's an injustice that was caused because fossil fuel corporations and the politicians that benefit from their donations lied about climate science for 30 years and prevented regulation of carbon dioxide. That was their lifeblood. So, I'm pissed about it.
Your newsletter is called Heated, a newsletter for people who are pissed off about the climate crisis, and everybody should subscribe to Heated. When you left the New Republic and started this, I remember thinking, well, I already admired your work, and I didn't know you that well, but I thought, more people were putting out these kind of newsletters. Your friend and mentor, Judd Legum, has a great one, Popular Info, and it's like, when you put out Heated, I was like, perfect person, perfect newsletter. There's a real necessity for what you're doing. Talk a little bit about this. You publish it 4 days a week. People can subscribe at heated.info. Is that right?
It's heated.world.
Excuse me. Should have had that.
No, it's fine. Well, Judd's newsletter is popular.info, and mine is heated.world.
So you go to heated.world and you can subscribe. You get it emailed to you 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. You work really hard on this, and it's awesome. I love it. I think I love it because I never know what to expect, who you're going to talk about. I think you go after industry, media, politicians, and us. I mean, just society. I mean, you every single day it's something a little bit different. You put a lot of work into it. Explain a little bit about what you're trying to do and why there is such a demand for Heated.
I'm trying to take the focus in climate change coverage off of we and put it onto they. I'm trying to change the narrative around climate change journalism that climate change is a problem caused by you and me, and that it's some hopeless thing that will never get solved. One of the things I say a lot in the newsletter is that all humans cause climate change, but only a few rich and powerful humans cause the climate crisis. And I am trying to change that narrative, number one, because I think it's true, but number two, because I think that it's extremely helpful to people to be able to think about it that way, because then they feel less paralyzed about climate change and realize that when you think about it this way, it kind of makes you pissed, and then it's a catalyzing force for action. And I think that the industry has worked really hard to get us to not think about it this way. It's the same reason why for many, many decades, plastic corporations have promoted consumer recycling programs, because they would like us to think about the plastic waste problem as an us problem. We're not recycling enough, rather than a they problem of we're producing too many single-use plastics that are really hard to recycle and dispose of. And I just think that's precisely because if the plastics industry tackles that, then they're not going to be able to sell more plastics, because we'll be reusing plastics.
There's been a real awakening in consciousness about plastic, especially single-use plastic. I've been talking about this forever, and people don't realize that the main ingredient is petroleum, and then they don't realize that as we reduce our fossil fuel usage, they still want to sell petroleum, and so they have different campaigns and ways of fucking with us to make us not really even understand this, as you just said. But that's a really, really powerful industry, the plastics industry, and they've got us buying water bottles by the individual bottle like every day, and people are waking up about that. But as a result, they're starting different new campaigns and all kinds of different ideas to make people think a different way, to not worry about it. It's fascinating how they're reacting to our awakening to plastic pollution, I feel.
As existential as a threat that climate change is to us, the threat to the plastic industry and the fossil fuel industry's profit is an existential threat to them.
Right.
So it's two existential threats fighting each other, right? And you have to expect that no matter what, no matter how far we get in this conversation, those industries are not going, they're going to do everything they can to try and take the attention off of produce less of the thing that makes you money. You know, that's the opposite of what the business is. So it's a tough problem to solve, but I think it is also a tackleable one. Unlike let's have everyone stop eating beef, which is sort of that's an amalgamous, like, weird blob of a problem that's kind of, it's less, the solution is less clear. But another thing that I feel like is important too, and what I'm trying to do with the newsletter, is just talk about these in a different way, in a more voicey way, and potentially, I hope, a more creative way. Start acknowledging the absurdity of the situation that we're in, make fun of it a little, have it not be so serious.
That's what I love about Heated.
Right.
Let me just read a couple of the opening lines for Heated.
Oh, God.
These banks be tripping. Like, that makes me subscribe.
They do be tripping.
We don't know shit about indigenous peoples.
We don't.
Love that. Trump's anti-environment agenda flourishes amid impeachment. What does this one have to do with heated climate?
What do you mean, the impeachment one?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just trying to say that while you guys are all paying attention to impeachment, just know that the Trump administration has not been distracted in its anti-climate, anti-environment agenda. It's actually been accelerating.
You have a whole list of things that they're doing. Yeah.
That's a list of things they did in the last week. It's just this huge list of stuff that's been going on in the background that we have no idea about, again, because they're just not being put at the forefront of our media institutions. You know, I would never bash like the New York Times for this, because they've been covering all of those anti-environment actions from the Trump administration in a really great way. But you do have to, for the most part, turn the page. You have to find it. And impeachment is a really important story. It's absolutely very important, but it's not the only story. Right. And so that's that was something I tried to do.
I'm kind of ignoring it now that I'm not on daily on SiriusXM and doing the news pretty much every day. I'm kind of like, Like, I actually trust that there's a lot of grown-ups in Congress that are being responsible, and I don't need to, and I can't follow it day to day. It's just too overwhelming. So I do focus on all of the other important news, like what you write about and Heated and so many other things, because it's just so complicated, the witnesses and the procedures and everything, connecting all the dots.
That's heartening to hear. I mean, I also pay attention to it, but it's because I listen to public radio all day because I work now. I mean, I work by myself now. I don't go to an office. So to feel like I'm not just in a weird alone bubble.
Do you miss anything about that? Not going to the office and like being with people and interacting with people? Now that you're working for yourself from your house mostly?
Can we Soups honest?
Yeah, please.
Not yet. I don't miss anything about it yet.
That's interesting. I don't either.
I really don't.
I thought I was going to.
I mean, because I have other outlets to talk to people. I've lived in this city for 6 years. I have a good group of friends. I have my people at the gym that I go see. I talk to my bodega lady. Like, I don't know. You
have enough interaction with like other people that you don't necessarily work with and depend on to work with, and those relationships tend to not be that authentic anyway.
Yeah, man.
You're at work and you got to be careful. And
I'm talking to you right now. I mean, if I had just moved to DC, right? I moved to DC 6 years ago. If I just moved here and then I had to work remotely, it'd be terrible. But I had my first 6 years here in offices with people. I made those friends, you know. I think being a little further along in my career, in my life, I'm just so happy I get to chill in my house, you know. It
looks awesome. I mean, it looks like a great life. I mean, you seem really content about it, and you're obviously working. I know a little bit. I know enough to know that you're putting hours and hours every day into tomorrow's newsletter. Heated. I mean, you're clearly spending a ton of time doing research and writing.
I am. It's like, you know, I probably have 3 more hours of work I have to do on it today, but I don't mind also because what I love about Heated so far, and you will probably relate because you've had the same thing with your listeners, is that I don't feel alone. I mean, I'm talking to people.
You built a community of people. Yeah, that's awesome.
Who send me emails all the time and who respond to my tweets, and I talk to you during the day. I'm reporting, so I'm talking to other people. I don't feel alone, and that is, I think, almost the beauty of climate coverage too, is that, you know, it is a way to make the community, like a big community, small. You know, Wayne, going back to Wayne, like he had New York, and that was his community, that was his constituency, and that's who he was serving with his journalism.
And your community is a community of people who care about the planet and the health of the future of the planet and communities. I mean, it's like,
localized climate coverage. It's not actually like regional. It's just a bit more intimate.
I love being a member of your community. I like reading Heated and knowing that there's other people reading this and caring about this. It makes me feel warm.
Yeah.
It's a bad choice. It makes you feel warm.
Warm is not necessarily
Global
bad.
warming.
But one of the things I want to do is once I put up the paywall for a certain amount of the content, not all of the content, but a certain amount, is that I want to give paid subscribers, a place where they can actually interact with each other. I
like it.
Yeah, so
I'm in.
Yeah, right?
I'm in.
So
let's do it.
I'm working with somebody to just develop a place where, because I don't want it to be, I was thinking about making it Facebook, but I was like, I really don't want it to be Facebook. So
it'll limit you because a lot of people aren't on there, I find.
Yeah, and also, I mean, man, there's a lot of interesting ethical stuff going on.
Oh yeah, Judd Legum's crushing them
exactly,
every day.
right?
Yeah, I hear you, but I hear you on that.
So just like a place where it's the subscribers only, paid subscribers can go there and talk about the things that I'm talking about in my newsletter every day, and I'll come in and I'll talk to people and, you know, do AMAs every once in a while. And so to really foster that sense of community, because I do want the newsletter to serve its readers, right? I don't want it to just be me every day deciding what to do. I want to know what's important to everybody, and I consider it my responsibility to have you informed about not only what you need to know, but what you want to know.
Well, this podcast is going to be so massive. Hopefully a lot of more people are now going to be subscribing to Heated. But now, you were so nice to have me in your lovely apartment, and you're working from home, and I just, maybe this is presumptuous, but I feel like now might be time for you to get a dog. What's your deal with animals?
I kind of feel like the newsletter is my baby right now, and my
No time to be responsible for another living thing.
Right. I'm trying to be responsible for me as a living thing and the newsletter as a living thing. And it would be almost
well, we
like...
don't want anything to interfere with your baby heated.
I know. And I'm also like a little allergic to pet hair. Not too much, but enough where I might sneeze too much and then I would get annoyed.
One of those we have a hypoallergenic dog, which doesn't seem like it should exist. But we have one of those. It's like hair, not fur or whatever.
Oh, yeah. No, I had one of those growing up, and I do love dogs. My parents have this big golden retriever. Amazing.
Some fan of Heated should get a dog and name it Heated.
Oh.
as a result of you being focused on this every day. Okay, so what about the environmental activist community? How are we doing? Are we using one voice? Is there a lot of things that we're doing wrong? Is there a lot of fragmentation in the environmental activist community? I mean, I look around and I don't see stuff on the surface very much, but I do hear things sometimes. I'm pretty well plugged in with the community, but I mean, overall, I feel like we're working towards the same goal, understanding what the problem is, maybe arguing about solutions, local, state, federal, international solutions. But how do you think the environmental community is doing in terms of working on together and not against each other?
There's still a big divide in the environmental community between the big greens and the grassroots activists. And there's still a big divide between the general climate activist, Greta Thunberg people and the justice activists, climate justice activists, which it's a race divide. There's a racial divide. And it's been getting much better, especially within the grassroots, smaller movements with the rise of the Sunrise Movement. And even Greta Thunberg, something she does, which I really admire, is she will give her speech and then she passes the mic off to an Indigenous leader. And she makes it a point to always center the voices of the people who are most disproportionately affected by the climate crisis.
Really important, yeah.
Right. And I respect that. And I think the climate movement as a whole is getting better at doing that. But the environmental movement as a whole has always been very bad at that. Going back 30 years, there's an article in the New York Times about how environmental groups, how civil rights group called out environmental groups for being so white-led and never centering Black voices, Indigenous voices, people of color's voices, and that's something that the movement continues to struggle with. There's been a lot of conversation about Greta Thunberg in general. Just the fact that isn't it funny how the voice that took hold finally was a little white girl, and when so many other youth activists have been speaking of color have been speaking out about this for a long time, and that's not to say that at all that Greta does not deserve her success and that she's not a wonderfully important figure in this movement, but it's something that I think, I know that justice activists would like people to think about why that is. And I know especially climate justice activists would love the movement to just center the people who are most affected by this crisis more. At the same time, though, the environmental activist community is growing in huge numbers in a way that's, I don't want to detract from its growth at all, because it's kind of awesome to see people connecting the dots between their daily lives and climate change and realizing that this is something that they really want, that they want addressed. So intersectionality is a big deal in climate change, and whatever solution that we do come across, we only have one chance to solve this, right? So if we do it in a way that is overly beneficial to white people, it's going to suck. So I would encourage all activists to keep that in mind.
Do you see any, when you watch the race, the presidential race, Democrats, how do you think they're doing talking about this issue? Is there anybody that you think has a better understanding, handle, much less policy solutions for it than others?
Yeah, I've been covering politics, climate politics, for 6 years now in DC, and I covered the 2016 presidential election, and I went all over the country and listened to candidates talk about issues, and I never heard shit about climate change ever. And when I did hear stuff about climate change, it was so kindergarten level. Climate change is real. It's happening. We need to do something. Applause. Next. So, So this year I've been blown. I've been blown the hell away by the level of intricacy on climate policy coming from the Democratic candidates. Every major Democratic candidate has a comprehensive climate policy right now, which is really, it's just, wow, that's crazy. I would say that when I look at the field and I see people who seem to have a deep understanding of the subject beyond what a policy advisor told them, obviously Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren jump out at me immediately. I'll give credit to Bernie Sanders especially for always bringing up the fossil fuel industry and climate change in conversations about other issues when not prompted to. That's something that Sanders has been doing a lot.
I've seen that. It's a really good point. Yeah.
And that's something I wish other candidates would do more, because... It's
something I always did on the radio, and that's why I always want to hear leaders do it as well. And I'm so glad you pointed that out, because it's a really good point.
Because it's not a single issue, and that's another misconception. That's what Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez said. The DNC won't have a climate change debate because then they'd have to have other single issue debates. And I'd smack myself on the head and just say, why do you think this is a single issue? It's clearly not. And so Bernie Sanders has done a good job of perpetuating the truth that it isn't. Elizabeth Warren does a particularly good job talking about the fossil fuel industry as a corrupt actor, as does Sanders, and as does Kamala Harris, actually. Kamala Harris uses her prosecutor background, to be like, we are going to go after these corporations for misleading the public about their products, and we're going to hold them liable in XYZ ways. And also, weird one is Cory Booker seems to really understand climate policy. Yeah. When he talks about climate policy, I can see that it's not just a thing that he has been briefed on by
he sincerely seems to care, be read in and passionate about it.
One of his campaign talking points, which I love, is he says this over and over, is that, you shouldn't be getting any credit as a candidate for saying that you're going to re-enter the U.S. into the Paris Climate Agreement. That's kindergarten.
Yeah,
he says that, and he's like, yeah, that's not an applause line. That's basic stuff. We need to go way further than that.
Probably say that about most of the things that they're saying, but that's a really good line.
It's true, and it just represents such a shift in political rhetoric on this topic that I am certainly encouraged by. We'll see how it goes.
I think it's the most encouraging thing too. Emily Atkin, I think we'll wrap it there, because I feel like you probably have to get back to work on tomorrow's Heated.world. Everybody subscribe and support this independent journalist who's doing amazing work and working really hard on it. It's vital, and it's super informative, and it's fun, and people should subscribe. Thank you for talking to me.
Thanks for coming over.
Yeah, thanks for letting me come into your apartment, and that could be terrifying. I don't know if I'd want people to come in, but
don't worry.
I feel like I was pretty well vetted.
I have, I have flowers on the table and everything. But yeah, thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon.
All right, Emily Atkin. Follow her on Twitter. Subscribe to heated.world. And now, every day, every podcast, it's time for 5 questions. You can ask me 5 questions. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, Facebook, or Twitter. Vanessa says, why can't we discuss overpopulation as we discuss climate change? We have to. Birth control is the answer. Sorry. Alex says, will you be interrupting your guests as much as you did in your last show? Just checking before I subscribe. To accurate criticism. Always trying to do better, Alex. Leslie Noble of Noble Pies, which is going to be on QVC today. Watch them. What is your favorite pie flavor? Come on. You know. It's raspberry. RJ, will you have trans women of color on your podcast to talk politics? Sure, why not? Find me one. Find me a trans woman of color who is really thoughtful and articulate, and I'd be happy to have her. And Kevin says, what's your honest opinion of the gig economy, friend or foe? Double-edged sword, Kevin. There's good, there's bad. I think we should all, as long as we all have health insurance, then gig economy it up. Just sucks when the gig ends. Thanks for your 5 questions. I'm Pete Dominick. Please subscribe and rate the podcast. And we'll talk to you Friday from Atlanta. Enjoy your day, everybody. Be the change that you want to see in the world. And the standard you walk past is the standard you accept, and death to single-use plastic. Talk all about Joe Rogan on Friday, too. Hopefully you'll listen to that podcast, Joe Rogan, or watch it on YouTube. 3 hours. Fascinating, wide-ranging conversation. Have a good day. I love you.